The fact is, I think the more you delve into the truly astonishing nature of existence, it's just too wild to be that explainable. And I think it would be cool to get into a deep conversation with, like I have a favorite physicist, Carlo Rovelli, who's like, to me, he's like a poet because he interprets high concept stuff that's way above me. I know it's way above me, but he has the gift of being able to translate it into somewhat, conceivable language for people like us. And he's very spiritual, because I think, when you're looking back at the origin of existence, it gets wild in there.
And it's one of those things where, every once in a while there's a breakthrough in quantum mechanics or string theory. And it is something that was completely inconceivable before and would have seemed ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff that they're getting with the James Webb telescope right now is like, when you look at those images, it's really stirring because it reminds us that we really have no idea what the hell's going on. But we keep trying to figure it out.
I guess at a certain point, like even the best scientist in the world has to give in to the fact that like, if we're lucky, we live like 80 or 90 years. There's a certain like very small portion of the sum of knowledge that we'll be able to get in our lifetimes. Yeah.
And they're such team players too. Like the idea that so many scientists work on a project that in their lifetime, they may never see the results that they did. Like if it lines up that you happen to live through the period of time where there was, a quantifiable achievement, then it's huge. But otherwise you're just in service, I love that they're in service to like always going toward being disproven, which is, a kind of a cool approach I try to use that in my life of instead of becoming, rigid, right, in your ideas and only seeking like just the confirmation bias thing that happens to all of us. Like instead of only ever looking for proof of whatever case you're building, I love the idea that you're looking for ways to disprove it. And if you can't disprove it, then it survives.
I do think there's something liberating in that, but it's also maybe doesn't really comport well with human nature. In that, like, regardless of your political beliefs, it's really hard admitting that you're wrong. And not just that you're wrong, but that you've like really committed yourself to a certain belief for most of your life.
Sunk costs. They're a killer. This is why I feel like the craft of creating music, like the way that Jimmy and I work together, is so intertwined with just like my fundamental existence, is because we've had to adopt these policies on sunk costs. And exactly what we're discussing, like, we'll work on something for weeks. Like I'll present something oftentimes that I've already spent innumerable hours at the piano, crafting. And then I'll bring it in to Jimmy. And if he's feeling it, it can be weeks of arrangements and just a hell of a lot of sunk costs. But then the reality is, if it didn't make it, we're ruthless and we just cut it down and it goes, on the cutting room floor and doesn't make it out into the world. And I feel like just the process of doing that, like being able to commit so fully to something and believe that this could be your next biggest song or be the thing that never even makes it out into the world. I feel like it's a good mental exercise, but it's excruciating.
My very basic understanding is part of the reason why the sunk cost fallacy is a fallacy is even if the thing that you were working on doesn't take the form that you wanted or were expecting, doesn't mean that it was a waste of time trying to get there.
Well, and that is what is cool about composition. It's true. And it instantly makes me think of athletics as well, because it's just every moment that you're spending within the pursuit of that thing. I think you're right. You have no way to really prove that when you land on something that it wasn't as a result of all those failed attempts previously. The line is not clear.
I don't know if the two of you work this way, but a lot of, especially musicians, but I guess artists generally, they'll come back to something, whether consciously or subconsciously, something you were working on a long time ago. For whatever reason, it didn't comport with something that you were trying to do before, but it just sort of bubbles up and it fits the moment perfectly.
Yeah, that does happen. I'm laughing because I have one song called The Athlete, ironically enough, given our conversation, and that I've threatened, like every single time we're going in to start on a new record, I always threaten, like, guys, I got a new bridge for The Athlete. I'm bringing it back. And they are not amused. No one has my back on that at all. But that's from early like fantasies writing sessions, so probably like 2006 or something. But it makes me laugh. The poor athlete. I feel bad. Like I feel like, you know, as much as I try to, you know, convey this idea to you that I'm like, so I accept, you know, this ruthless editing approach. I do sometimes feel like I've failed the song. You know, I'm like, sorry, man, you had so much potential. I didn't get you what you needed to get you up and walking around, but it's weird to have relationships with ideas like that.
It's funny, you know, you're laughing about now, and it sounds like it is funny to you in the process of bringing it to them, but you're also committed to it, right? I mean, you see something in it.
I do. Oh, this is bad. This is not a good thing that this is coming up again, because
does this come up in interviews, or this comes up in meetings with the bands?
Just that it's come back up. Don't think I've ever spoken to anyone about it. No, it's coming up for me. It's exactly as you say. I'm like, damn it, that first line.
Maybe talking to somebody outside of the band, maybe we can like kind of talk through and you know, either we'll figure out what the essence is, or we'll figure out why it's time to move on from it.
Well, it's funny because the lyric is, you're still living for high school, which I think is great. And I think, but it's like so much stuff that happens with the writing is like, it's sort of this, it's looping in on itself. Like the snake is eating its tail, because it's like, in a way, I feel like I'm still living for high school and trying to get the athlete made. But, yeah, I always think the word high school just sounds really good in a song, like High School Confidential. I can't think of a single other example.
There's probably some Hold Steady song with high school in it.
Yeah, for sure. There's probably some like bad 50s, like diner vibes with the word high school.
Yeah, high school bop, or my high school totally. Baby.
Yeah. But the beginning of the song is like, you know, I saw you on the street with the last of your old class, the athlete and the loser, the future and the past. Like that idea when you bump into someone and they've either completely changed or they're the same. I think the idea warrants a solid 3-minute banger. I mean, this is bad. I'm fired up, and I'm probably going to go back in there and make this pitch again. You'll be the first to know if I get accepted.
I do think there's something to it, because it is, I mean, it's a song about not letting go, right?
Well, it could be, we have room, you know, in the second verse. That's what the second verse is for, is to elaborate and perhaps cast some judgments on it. But it could also just be stylistically, I love the observational style of writing, where it's just not necessarily attaching it one way or the other, you know. I guess it would be, it's kind of calling it, saying you're still living for high school is kind of calling out this person in the from the verse, but could be a good thing. Could, you know, the fact that they're still living for high school could be the reason that they're CEO.
The implications of that specifically are that they're stuck in that loop, as you put it before.
So it doesn't sound like a compliment. Like, hey, I ran into Randy. Man, the guy's still living for high school. You're not like, that's great news.
I guess the one thing I would say that could potentially flip it on its head is that, you know, because I mean, we've all encountered that before, and that's like the whole thing about like high school reunions, or like going back to your hometown and seeing those people. Oftentimes those were the people who like bullied you or were kind of shitty to you at the time. And it's a sort of vindication. But if you step outside it for a second and look at yourself, aren't you also kind of stuck in high school if you're casting that judgment on them? I mean,
it's hard to argue that. It's true. And it may also just be that even if we all feel like we've grown past whatever that experience was like for all of us, that it is motivating subconsciously if you're lucky, and possibly consciously if you're not, where it's like, I'll show Brett, you know, like as you say, like the guy that bullies you, or
Brett's a good name.
It's a good bully name.
Did you pull that out of nothing, or is there a Brett?
Oh, that's out of nothing. Yeah. It just seems like that would be the guy. But yeah, I mean, for me, actually, my early thing that I still know is the, like, I'll show them, was when I was really little. And there was a talent show, and elementary school was like all the way from kindergarten to grade 8. So that's a big swath. So I was in kindergarten, and it's like, you know, I mean, it sounds like a scene from a bad American movie, but it's like, the whole auditorium is full of the kids and it's the talent show. And like, the cool kids are doing their like cover bands with their guitars and all that. But I was totally adamant. And I remember this so vividly. I was totally adamant about doing Somewhere Over the Rainbow a cappella. I was like, no, I'm going to kill it. It's going to be amazing. It's bold, right? And I remember my teacher being, Emmy, do you think maybe you want to try, maybe someone could play piano with you, or maybe you want to do, and I was like, no, I got this. Like, and I got up there and I went like somewhere, like Muppet Show style, like, and I still have the visuals so clear in my head of the entire auditorium just like going, laughing so hard, like pointing, laughing. I think my brother and sister were in there somewhere. And
there's no way it went down exactly like that, though.
I mean, I can show you the reels straight from my brain. But I do still feel with anything, like when I think about the core motivations for what keeps me going in my work, I swear to God, it's that feeling of like, I'll show you guys, like, you laughed at me then, but mwahaha, like, who's laughing now? That I know that still motivates me. Because my mom said that after that was like, I'm never singing again. And then, promptly was switched attitudes. But
I'm not going to suggest that vindication or revenge are necessarily the best motivators. But that said, like, I think there is something to that, because I do think that a majority of people would have had that experience and then just never wanted to repeat it again and never gone back on stage. But obviously that hasn't stopped you.
Well, it must be also that there's that time frame when you're a kid where perhaps it doesn't matter what happens, it's going to determine some elements of your direction. Because conceivably, someone could have had, like, take that exact same story taken from my perspective, but maybe there was someone else at that talent show who killed it with their, like Poison cover or whatever. And that they still relive in their mind that moment as being like the high of when they were king and everyone loved them. And they've spent their whole life being like, someday I'm going to get that feeling back. It could go both ways. So, and
I don't think we talk about this enough, but there is a way in which success can almost be a demotivator. You've achieved the thing that you wanted to achieve. You got to where you wanted to be. Why are you going to continue to push yourself?
Peaking too early and then chasing something for the rest of your life and never being able to get that back.
Take me through what happens between that moment on stage at the talent show, things not going the way they looked in your head, to you actually really committing yourself to being a musician.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was really one of those things of, as a kid, it was just my thing. Just being at the piano, I just felt like it was like a portal, like Narnia vibes, like just as soon as I sat down, I felt like I couldn't believe what was possible. And, really creative family. My mom and dad, my mom's a painter and my dad's a poet, and they were both teachers. So it was a really good environment. I even feel like my brother and sister were super supportive. Like as I got older, my brother introduced me to a lot of music, told me to stop listening to the radio and listen to the good stuff, playing me vinyl records and buying me recording equipment, rudimentary cassette recording that I could do 4-track recording and stuff. So it was pretty immediate. And then I was getting in a lot of trouble when I was a kid, and I had a teacher that helped me get an audition at a school in Toronto. And that was just really, I feel like my whole life I've just had that good fortune of, everyone's got those bad teachers, but I just feel like the ones that are good are just such a lifesaver, right? Like, so he helped me get an audition and I got into this art school, and then that just kind of solidified things. And it's a grind. Like I can't believe that Jimmy and I have been able to keep this going for 20 years and stay true to the ethical and sort of the principle of how we want things done, owning our own material, etc. But there was never really a wavering. The only time I've wavered where I felt like I might not be able to do this was when the first sort of wave of like the social media demands started, where it was like, I'd come home off tour and it was like, oh, I'm supposed to spend my day photographing an omelet, to keep my band relevant. I was like, I'm a private person. I'm not going to sit around taking photos of myself, like in my house by myself. I can't do this. And then all those obligations too, like on the road with like Twitter and stuff. I was like, this is the only time I've ever felt like I can't do it. But then I solved that because I got like a partner who I do all that stuff with. And now it's like, we're a team, and I feel like I dodged that bullet. But other than that, I kept going because I'm going to show those kids in the auditorium what I'm made of.
This is something that always fascinates me, talking to somebody who like is ostensibly a public figure, but who considers himself a private person. How do you reconcile those two things?
Yeah. I mean, to me, if I ran for public office or something, it's kind of part of the job description. And I see it as part of the job description with being a musician when it comes to like, doing press, hanging out, having this conversation with you. We do lots of meet and greets. We do lots of stuff with fans and talking to people and being open and generous with your time and all that stuff. But to me, it's not, obligatory that you have to, cannibalize seemingly endlessly for people who take that route. It seems like it's like there is no end to how personal and how revealing you're going to go to just like keep feeding the machine. Like the tube, I can't do it. So, and happily, I feel like that's totally been accepted. Like I have lots of in-depth conversations. I'm not closed off, but no one's expecting it of me that I have to divulge stuff that's about my personal life. It's cool.
The timing probably helped. It probably helped that you were established before that the wave of social media came along.
Agreed. And also just that I thought about it and didn't just get swept up in it. Because I think that's the problem is once you start, you can't really, it's hard to get back. That's always like one of the funniest things when celebrities are like, I'm leaving social media, like, and then they're back. Because I think people get addicted to the attention too, right?
You use the word cannibalize.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean in this context?
Well, I mean, I have a whole sort of philosophy about what I call like emotional capitalism, which is basically what my job description is in a way, is like it's taking, the sense of everything being currency truly, which currency maybe has a negative connotation to it, but I don't mean it that way when I say it.
Capitalism certainly does.
Yeah, it doesn't, there are different kinds of currency. There's like indie cred is a currency. It's a little bit like crypto, but it's a thing.
It's about as stable.
Totally. Yeah, not a lot of other currencies pinned to indie cred. It's not the greenback of currencies. But yeah, I mean, I feel like what I offer, my purpose, my usefulness in the world is being able to craft, take emotional experiences and some, interpretations of the world and ways of expressing things that maybe people struggle with and getting them concise and clear in a piece of music. And that's then packaged and, ostensibly sold if we actually bought albums anymore, but that's a whole other conversation. So to me, it's like, I accept that because there's a certain amount of like production on my part of taking a raw emotion and turning it into something of value. Which may not be monetary value, but it is of value to the people who listen to it and say, man, thank you, Haines, I needed that. Like you helped me clarify that or, whatever it is. But so the cannibalizing thing is like, definitely has a negative connotation to it, where it's the idea that you're just sort of endlessly destroying things of value in your life just for the purpose of trying to have something to feed other people. So, for example, if I was someone who, in my relationship, if with my boyfriend, if I was like every day, all day trying to get shots of, get him to take pictures of me in every state of every moment, or constantly live streaming or constantly like, tweeting out stuff and being all fired up in that realm, to me, that's just like you're cannibalizing your life. And God forbid you bring along, other people. So
he did not sign up for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly in this conversation and what I've seen from you in the world, like you are and can be an open person when the situation calls for it or when you're feeling it. As somebody who came up really appreciating things like I know, you perform with Lou Reed and punk and things like that. How important is the mystique? Is that something that you risk you removing that veil if you give up too much of yourself or if you explain too much of the music?
I don't know. I feel like maybe, and maybe that's a positive byproduct of my decisions, is maybe I have a little bit left or something, but I feel like it might be a concept that's sort of, I mean, I'm with you on the idea of valuing mystique, but it almost feels a little bit like when you try to talk to people about the concept of selling out and they have no idea what you're even talking about. Like,
yeah, under the age of what, like 30 at this point is probably the cutoff now.
Like,
yeah.
What do you even mean? So I think mystique, when you see the level of, self exposure that has yielded great success and great results for a lot of people, I think the argument could be made that, mystique it ain't what it used to be. Or like, I like saying, you're not hiding if no one's looking for you, which is, I think, probably more the case with me. Is like, it's just, there's not, but regardless, I'd still rather have mystique than overexposure. That's for sure.
The concept of selling out in particular is very interesting to me in 2020. As somebody who came up going to a lot of punk shows, and is part of that, this idea of letting go or killing your darlings, knowing when these ethos that were really important to you at a very formative point of your life have maybe outworn their welcome?
I don't think the two are related. I mean, for us, we're perhaps in a borderline juvenile way, just absolutely the most stubborn as ever about, my views have not changed on the fundamental flaws in the boilerplate, recording contract, the way that we look at as a default setting of how it is that you should be in business as a musician and a writer in the world, I think is just fundamentally flawed. And realizing that, I totally recognize that there are loads of people that it works great for. They don't want to own their music. Maybe they don't even want to write their music, which, by the way, is also totally fine. There's great singers that just they're a perfect person to be made into a product and it works. I don't know anybody. I only know horror stories. And then we all have, the superstars as the exceptions that prove the rule, right? But, we haven't changed at all. And in fact, it's been really rewarding to see that it's a confusing sometimes situation because we're total team players, but we just kind of refuse to play by those rules. So it can be isolating, very. We didn't want to be isolated, but it was also not possible for us to do it another way. But so then we ended up working with 30 Tigers, which has been really great because Macias is oh yeah, you guys are the way you're doing it is exactly why we exist. And we feel like we have this whole family now working the new album. We own our masters. It's simple. And so we can all work really hard and not feel like we're being duped. So yeah, I haven't given up on any of those principles.
Part of growing up is figuring out which of your stands were done for good reasons, but ultimately were completely arbitrary.
Yeah. Posturing.
Yeah. Well, they felt like they were motivated by the right forces at the time. Certain things that you wouldn't do because you risk selling out. And then you look back on them and you're like, oh, that was completely silly.
I mean, it's weird because obviously I know what you mean, but the ones that's come to mind, there was one thing where we've done lots of TV placements and stuff and movie work and stuff. But there was one where it was Victoria's Secret, for that runway, underwear hellscape thing. They wanted Youth Without Youth from Synthetica. And that song was so close to my heart and I absolutely shut it down. And then I had a little window, a little wobble after that because it was kind of a lot of money and kind of a lot of exposure. And, I think I ended up seeing and hearing what song they used instead and was oh man, I think I maybe missed the mark. And then with time, I'm just so happy as, it's not like people didn't have a sense that there was some nasty stuff going on with Victoria's Secret, but it really did kind of get revealed. And I'm like, yes, that was the right decision. And the other one that comes
you didn't have to be a psychic to know that Les Wexner was, right? Maybe like, not.
It wasn't. It wasn't like, how did I manage to figure out that this is the most grotesque thing? But yeah, it could have just been gross, not that gross. It turned out to be that gross. But the other one that I find actually funny as hell that also ended up working out okay, but is on Old World Underground. I remember being so adamant with Michael Andrews, who produced the record, like no reverb on the vocals, like zero. And if you listen to the record, you'll hear it. It's like, it's bone dry, which totally works. And he probably would have really pushed me on it if he didn't feel like stylistically it was going to work. But that to me is an example of what you're talking about, where it's like, it's actually ignorant. It's like, you're not understanding sonics. Like actually, like, you know, you're not going to sound like a cheap karaoke singer just because you use reverb. But in a lack of experience, you know, I associated it with like just being like overly touched up sounding female vocals. And I was like, no, man, like no reverb. So if you
Autotune before Autotune,
there's zero reverb on my vocals on that whole record.
I think about this all the time. And, you know, most of the musicians I talk to they'll tell you that the thing that dates a record more than anything is the way that the drums are recorded. But it's so strange to me. And maybe this is just me kind of getting older and, you know, I guess not being as with it as I used to be, but a song with Autotune, I still I can't do it. And it's completely seeped into just like every facet of music making. It
happened to me last night, actually, where I was hanging out and I was listening to, I love exploring, finding new music, like all styles of music, right? But I was listening to, I love Damon Albarn from Blur. And we actually, when we played Coachella the last time, it was just like the best dream lineup because it was the year that they had their reunion and they were actually really good, which is also always just like, yes, okay, like, thank you for not sucking. This is so positive.
This was done for the right reasons.
Exactly. And so I was kind of reminiscing about that and feeling good vibes. And then I saw that there was a collab with Flume, there's a song that I really liked from Flume. I was like, that's cool. Like, and then, but to your point about the Autotune thing, then within like 2 seconds of just feeling like I was on like a happy kind of exploratory ride of like checking out stuff, I ended up in just a complete Autotune, like hellscape, where all my open-mindedness and everything just evaporated. And it was just like it's just a line in the sand where I'm like, I can't even interact with this piece of music because and I see why you prefaced your comment by saying maybe it's being older or whatever, because it is one of the only instances where I feel like maybe this is just a generational thing where I'm just like, we played this festival, the Strokes played, and like Julian Casablancas is doing all this stuff with Autotune on it. I'm like, why are you doing that? It's like killing me. But we're alone. We are not the rule.
I always wanted to do like, you know how they did the Phil Spectorized version of Let It Be?
Oh, I heard about that. What does it sound like?
On the original record, like Phil Spector went overboard. Like there's all like sound snippets and stuff in there. Mm-hmm. It's mostly just that taken away. It's the orchestration taken away. And I just feel like, just give us a version of that for this Autotune stuff, you know, give us like 2 versions of the record.
Totally. Yeah. And I feel really stubborn about that though, that I'm like, I don't see that changing.
I listen to a lot of hip hop and I was just like, all right, we'll deal with 2 years of this and then we'll move on. And it's like, no, this is just how it is now.
Right. Like creeping in. I mean, I do feel like 070 Shake, a friend of mine, produces a bunch of her stuff. And I feel like she's one of the only examples where it's like, I hear it, I know I hear it, but it's something where it feels like it's being used as one of the tools, as opposed to like, you know, it feels like the same thing when like that dreaded feeling when you're putting on a great film and it's in like HD Sports Max mode on the screen. You know, it gives me the exact same feeling where it like turns everyone into, you know, like an orange-faced newscaster, but it's like a Fellini movie or something. It's just like, no.
Fellini did not shoot for 4K.
Not.
There's a really great quote from you that I'm was kind of trying to wrap my brain around. I'm sorry, I'm going to quote you at yourself, which I apologize in advance for this, but you said we were really pushing ourselves to make the thing that will carry us into the next 2 decades of our career. And this is interesting, right? Because we're talking about staying true to your roots, but also, you've been doing this for a long time, trying to, I don't know if relevant is the right word, but like there are ways in which maybe you feel obligated to keep up with the times.
Yeah, it's funny. I like thinking ahead to the next 2 decades, because that's a thing. Like there are those people who are genuinely legends who do it their entire life, and barring some horrific outside interference, that is 100% like I've signed up that this is what I'm doing with my life with Jimmy, and for us, I just think the relevance piece, because it's totally there. Like, the idea that we would just, if we were going to fall back on something, what would we do? We'd try to make fantasies over and over again. I mean, it wouldn't work, right? Because that album clicked in 2009 because it was 2009 and that was the album in that time. It's not, it's not a freestanding thing. We're all moving through space and time, last I checked. So I think it's just for us, like if we just keep pushing and continuing to defy really what should be a pragmatic approach. Like, for example, maybe on your 8th album after a pandemic, don't start with a 10.5-minute song as track 1. Like, just putting it out there. If you've got
your clear single as the second track on the record.
Yeah. But we just push ourselves and we make it ideally relevant in that way, because we're doing everything we can to like participate in the moment. But the idea of chasing like a certain demographic, or like the idea that everyone younger than you needs to love what you're doing. Like we have a lot of younger people than us come to our shows. It's great. I feel like that presence is there, but I feel like there's just so much insecurity. And maybe it was always like this, but I just can't get with this idea that like anyone sort of, in your 40s, you're just desperately like courting the opinion of a, 14-year-old boy or something. It's like, I'm good, man. I don't feel like, people have been making art and making music for a long time. And there's some stuff that's great for the little kids and the teeny boppers, and there's room for everything. And I don't know if it's because that like, we're all just communicating by emoji now, or what the hell of why there's this sense of just being so like infantilized and so immature and just like insecure about like wanting, a 10-year-old to be fired up about your music. Like they are fantastic, hopefully they're coming with their parents and there's a cool conversation. But so we'll see either this attitude that we have of just trying to have like a shred of confidence, 20 years in, God forbid, maybe it'll totally backfire and it'll be like, we'll just lose people. But that hasn't been happening. It's been the opposite. I think people are engaged because we're so committed to actually doing something other than just clinging to the past, right? I mean, or like chasing the youth.
I definitely don't have any more insight into any of this than you do, obviously, as somebody who's been in it. But I will say that from my perspective, I don't think that that's anything new. I think, have you heard about the concept of teenagers were invented in the 50s?
I haven't heard that, but tell me more.
For most of history, children were just like kind of viewed as young adults. And this idea of them just sort of being like autonomous beings really developed, I guess, sort of post-war, baby boomer period. If you really like take the time and study what pop music has looked like, this is a cycle that repeats over and over again. And the reason why it's hard to see is because the people that you ultimately end up seeing are those few who are able to buck the trend. But like a majority of people they're chasing that because they know that those are the core people. That's what they build that foundation on. I had Nick Lowe on the show, and he's like, I think he's probably the best example of like aging gracefully in pop music. And the reason why it's so remarkable is because it is an outlier. Right.
I think about that sometimes. Like I've a kind of running analogy going lately, which is like the idea of, when you see you've got your restaurant in your neighborhood that is your favorite restaurant. And maybe it's even really hard to get a reservation, and maybe it's a Michelin star even, like but everyone knows it's really good. This isn't like it's not a pub. It's like a really great restaurant that has a certain capacity, and it's been around forever, and it's consistently good, and it's success, right? I was thinking how you never go into one of those places and think, oh man, this is so good, but God, it'd be so much better if there were like 60 franchises, or this would be so much better if the capacity of this lovely room was, 100 times bigger and you could ram people in, and thinking of this like comparatively with the work that we do as musicians and this sort of default like attitude that bigger is always better and more people, whoever they are, doesn't matter, is always better. And kind of like connecting this back to like the outlier thing, is just like, the generic, like chicken McNuggets are, we all know what that is and why they're ubiquitous.
And there's a uniformity to them. Like, they actually have molds for them.
What's that?
There's like 3 or 4 shapes for chicken McNuggets.
I was unprepared for that piece of information. I learned a lot.
I didn't think you were eating chicken McNuggets, so I'm sorry if I ruined them for you.
Yeah, changed my lunch plan. But, like the idea of, and also being fine with that and realizing in music, the same thing's going to happen where there's, you could rattle off a handful of names at any given point that are totally ubiquitous, like chicken McNuggets or whatever. But there's no one's under the illusion that this is making some sort of amazing impact, right, in the world. And like just this fallacy of that scale is always synonymous with longevity and success and purpose and value. And I find that more that I like kind of work within that analogy, I really like it because it's when I've mentioned it to friends who are kind of like up against it, it's hard. Like I know a lot of musicians are really talented and they just feel completely worthless, I feel like that analogy is really helpful of just like, don't get confused. Like there's a reason that some things are everywhere, but that doesn't mean that their value is more. Maybe this sounds so absolutely pedantic and basic, but you know what I'm getting at.
I will say, the one thing I will say is I think that analogy works for you because you've been able to achieve a certain scale that has allowed you to continue making a living doing this.
Yeah, like I'm that restaurant that hasn't had an empty table for 20 years or whatever, right? Like
exactly. If you were like opening every night and nobody came in, like it would be time to do one of two things: either make a radical change or shut the restaurant down.
Right. That's right. Yeah, but that within this analogy, that because you've been able to do that, or I've been able to do that, that it isn't necessarily the only way to stay relevant, stay engaged, increase your impact, isn't always by increasing your scale. And I think that that's perhaps like late capitalist, our brains we're just there thinking that more is always more, to the point that people feel totally worthless if they have something successful on a certain scale. And I guess that's just kind of what I've been trying to dig in on and not get swept up in that insecurity and chasing the data, chasing the numbers, because we're living in a time when everyone is looking at numbers under, everything they do. Like, and I think about like, using the word civilian, kind of joking around, but like, a civilian, that's like a teenage girl, like, posting a picture, and she's kind of dealing with the same sort of data points that she's got to interpret just casually, socially, as part of her existence, as we do when it's part of our business model. And I really feel for people that all of life is now like a publicly tabulated running tally of your quote unquote value. It's like, I do think it's worth having these conversations of recognizing the data is great, but it's measuring certain things. It's not, we don't have data points for like soul, just, it sounds obvious, but let's just remind ourselves, we're not there yet.
I think there's a piece of this that we're missing that I think is interesting, and it'll be interesting to see. I don't know the answer to this, but those of us who specifically lived through, I would say the 90s, probably decades prior, are coming into this with this feeling that they're there's value in not having mainstream recognition, and
Right.
that we do appreciate those things that are just our thing. And I honestly, like, I don't know, is that something for people who are coming up now? Is there power in being underground?
Well, this is exactly what I think is tricky, and why we're useful, hopefully, for the morale of younger people who are maybe feeling a bit daunted, is that, like, we can explain that there was a time, there was a way where you would choose, right? As you're saying, like, the idea of being underground, kind of like the terminology of selling out, or these concepts that seem to have just disappeared, was like that you were choosing. You were saying, like, I'm making decisions because I'm trying to attract certain people and I'm trying to do a certain thing. It wasn't this idea that it was a bit exclusive, right? Like, so like when I look at the choices that Metric made and the kind of songs that we write, what we write about, the way we perform, everything we did was not us saying, over here, everyone, like, we're trying to get along with everybody. That's never been the agenda. And instead it was like, we're going to craft something and hopefully we're going to find our people because they're going to connect with that. But I don't know how you do that now when everything is sort of in the same, it feels like it's in this like Coliseum almost, where you can see everyone. So you can see that someone's only got 6 people at their show. Whereas before, it would just be something that would be allowed to happen where 6 people were at your show, and you wouldn't have to feel this sort of humiliation of feeling underappreciated in the grand scheme of the billions of people on earth. Like, and I think you're absolutely right that is a generational thing. And like so many things from being my age, that I feel so lucky, like that we have kind of a shred of dignity, from remembering that there was such a thing as people being like, no, I want to play these little clubs. I stand for something. There's a sense of the underground having meaning, rebellion having meaning, as opposed to just being that everything you're doing is trying to attract more and more people.
I mean, one thing that we talked around but didn't quite get to is the opening track on the record, from the standpoint of you saying that you felt empowered to do that because of the decisions you made. But beyond that, what was the motivating factor to pick that as the opening track? Because it's like, both in terms of length, the pace of the song, and the subject matter, it's heavy.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like it was either going to be last or it was going to be first. And it was a pretty passionate discussion.
If it was last, people would probably never hear it. You know what I mean? Like, just,
yeah, it's insecure.
Yeah, but also people don't really, they don't really, and they never really did, like classically, like oftentimes there'll be this really long song at the end of an album, but most of the time you're listening through, you stop before you get there.
Well, I guess it depends on the album, but yeah, in this
case, like we've all been there, right? Where it's just like,
oh, for sure. And a lot of times, yeah. And if you place it, especially since I think people who listen to our music know sequence is a big thing for us with the albums. And if you place it there, I totally agree. Like it's saying something else. It's saying like, hey, I'm going to leave you with this. Like, it's a very different meaning. But I think one of the things that pushed it over the edge was like the sense that we're going to have to continue being bold. That's going to be what works for us, not works against us. And then also this kind of like side bit, which is the first line of every album has a lot of significance when we look back. And I just felt like coming out of what we've just been through and apparently are still in and going back in and whatever is happening with the pandemic, but lining up all the numbers under the names is, even without the pandemic, we can all pull to mind any number of horrific themes where we're lining up numbers under names. And I just felt like I felt confident that people who, Metric fans are cool, and that they would be like, wow, this is really intense, and I'm down for it. We don't leave you hanging. I feel like you do get redemption at the end, but yeah, it's weird too, because initially I felt like it was so dark, and sometimes I'm scared about stuff. Like I've definitely written stuff where I'm like, this is not helpful for people. This is like, and then I swear the world got darker to match the darkness of Doom Scroller. So that by the time it came out, it's like, it was like, yeah, lining up all the numbers under the names. Like that's what we've all been doing for 2 years. So sorry, I just got really depressed. Oh, I'm still like coughing as I'm just getting over COVID. So
You got it recently too?
Yeah.
I think the flip side of the conversation that we've been having for most of the interview, this idea of staying relevant is when songs are tied to a specific theme and a specific moment in time, do you risk it almost being too relevant, of it not resonating, like, knock on wood, if we get out of this thing eventually in the same way that it does at the moment?
Yeah, I know it's, I had that at the beginning of the, like, in March 2020, I just had a full meltdown with Jimmy where I was like, I can't write. Like, I'm not writing a bunch of work about this like ridiculous, terrible situation. No one's going to want to think about this. We're all going to want to be on the other side of it. And he was like, you're going to write. And I was like, no, I'm not. And then I totally wrote a lot. And then I had that same thing where I was like, this record can't be something that is looking back. It has to be, it's that the whole setting is us coming out, which is definitely what we tried to do. And I hope that we did. But in the end, what swayed me about the topical nature of a lot of the lyrics, particularly Doom Scroller, like, is, as I said, unfortunately, that can be applied to a lot of other topics. But Jimmy said, he's like, this has been a global phenomenon. And it's like, you saying, I don't want to write about the pandemic, is someone being like, I'm not, writing about World War II. It's like, you can't, at some point, the historic fact of the time that you're living in, it like permeates everything. And I think what I was resisting, similar to kind of what I feel like you're bringing up, is like the idea, like, come on, was it really that big a deal? Like, maybe the music should supersede that, or like, we don't want it to be this blip that but I feel like now, especially since I'm seeing that, I don't know, man, I don't see us ever being fully out of, I think we're permanently changed now, that, unfortunately, I think it's just going to fit into the fabric of life, as opposed to being like something that's too tied to the pandemic, but we'll see.
Yeah. I'm going to say something really dark and then just move on it from immediately, but I'm in New York, I'm in the States, and last year we've had 4 or 5 shootings that like absolutely line up with that first line of that song. So
I know
it's a lot to imbue in a specific album to say this is the album that sets us up for the next 2 decades, right? That's like a huge responsibility that you're putting on one record. But again, maybe you're not like a master prognosticator, but kind of abstractly, what are those elements? What, and how are you sort of able to define what going into the next 2 decades of metric looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I think those elements are definitely the boldness, and really like expanding what rock is, because poor rock is kind of like an unloved genre currently, but that's cool. That's okay with me, because things come in and out of favor. I don't really care.
Yeah, and here we are again, with the undergrounds,
but just where we want it to be. So I feel like that the boldness is going to continue to be key. And crucially, I think, as was the case on this record, is it's not about like taking the temperature of some sort of cultural climate and being like, aim for that, like steer your ship toward that, landmark. It's opposite. It's internal, pushing myself. I really can only speak for myself. And I know those 3 guys do the exact same thing, the guys in the band. So, but it's just pushing myself past my own discomfort, checking myself anytime it starts to get lazy, and going toward more vulnerability, more openness, and less clinging to nothing. Is going to be the recipe for us. And I think that if we stay with this attitude, and Jimmy developing, as through the 20 years I've worked with him, of his production and just pure love of like modular synthesis and all these instruments, constantly learning, constantly evolving, I feel like we're going to make some really cool sounds that correlate to an emotional place for people that's valuable and useful. And I have no idea what that will look like in terms of scale. I have no idea if it'll be a diminishing pool of people who are interested. And honestly, as long as we're okay, I don't even mind. As long as I feel like the work is getting better. But we have sort of defied a lot of rules over time and had more people come to us. So they'll know why they're there. It probably won't be because we have like a dipping sauce at Taco Bell. Here's to the next 2 decades.